Welcome to the Leading Man podcast. I'm Ewan, your host, and this week I've got Marcus Kain with me. As an eating disorder informed nutrition coach and trainer, Marcus's specialism is in helping others beat binge eating and work through body image challenges. After struggling with eating disorders during a 10-year career in the fitness industry, Marcus now helps others via his Strong Not Starving podcast and through his private coaching. Marcus, great to have you here. Welcome.
Ewan, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. I don't think binge eating, body image is something that's talked enough amongst men. Yeah, so where should we start? What's your journey there?
I have come to understand as an adult that the foundations of my issues with emotional eating were kind of laid when I was a kid, and then issues with body image and intensely restrictive dieting and obsessive compulsive habits with exercise and training happened more when I was a teenager. So usually issues with binge eating and that kind of disordered eating and even eating disorders, they come from this combination of three primary causes: emotional or mood dysregulation, which most people just call emotional eating, but mood dysregulation is a big part of it, using food to try and manage our emotional experience. Then there's diet rigidity, that is also a massive contributor. And then there's what called in clinical settings anyway, the overvaluation of weight and shape, what most people would just call negative body image. So I struggled with all three of those things simultaneously, but I've come to realize, again, like as an adult and with reflection and awareness and everything, that the foundations of my emotional eating and seeking to kind of manage my emotional experience with food, that began as a kid. The foundations of the overvaluation of weight and shape and negative body image, again, those foundations were laid as a kid, but it became more evident in a practical sense, I guess, when I was a teenager and getting into trying to change my physical appearance through exercise and dieting. And yeah, it was a difficult path, I guess, because a lot of the things that are sold to us or accepted as solutions when it comes to health and all this kind of stuff are actually really unhelpful for a lot of people who struggle with these things. And it's not to say that all of our solutions and all of our options in terms of health and fitness and everything need to be thrown out and they're all unhelpful. It's just that for those of us who are kind of set up to struggle with food and body image, we need to pivot a little bit on how we approach those things. And obviously, back in the 1600s, when I was a teenager, there wasn't a lot of awareness around this stuff. And like you mentioned just before you hit record, conversations between men about this are still particularly rare.
Yeah, I really feel that. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. So hearing that it started for you as a child, right, in emotional regulation, and that as a teenager, it was then more about the body image and how you related to yourself. Really fascinating to hear those three elements to eating difficulties, disorders. Before coming on, I was doing a little research. I was interested, like you said, like we said before we came on, this isn't really a topic that's talked about much amongst men. I was like, how many men actually in the UK are struggling with eating disorders? And according to the Priory, it's approximately 500,000 men within the United Kingdom, which for me was like a shocking statistic. That's huge, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely huge. And so I suppose with that in mind, and just for information there, that's about a quarter of all eating disorders. So it seems that they're disproportionate number of women, like 3 times the amount of women that suffer with eating disorders. This being your profession, I'm keen to hear your experience with men and women. Like, is there a clear difference, do you think, in this for men and women?
There is pressure on both men and women in ways that lead to disordered eating and eating disorders. I would say that the male and female experience is different, as the non-binary experience is also different, but we don't have as much research on that. So there is a difference in the experience from individual to individual. Of course, there's common ground between individuals, like none of us is that unique. And also there's differences in the experience of different genders, just because of the social pressures and the expectations that are put on different people. Like, for example, of course, with women, there's the emphasis on kind of being in the smallest body possible. You know, there's a lot of my female clients talk to me about that kind of pressure, feeling like they need to make their body as small as possible. Whereas with men, it's a bit more about that muscularity and you know, not being as small as possible, but you know, there are the other layers to that with the masculine imagery and what we expect of the masculine body. Like that's, you know, that changes the experience a little bit for sure.
Yeah, I really hear that. I really hear that. So with women, it's about being slim and trim, and with men, it's about so-called masculine prowess, that men have got to try and fit themselves to something. And I know your experience being largely in the fitness industry, and that being where you struggled with your own eating disorders and body image. Was that going on for you a lot? You were constantly looking at your body and comparing, and what was the kind of psychology? I'm really interested to hear what it was like for you.
In the fitness industry, it was a really kind of rough experience because I knew that I was in a rough place, or I started to gain awareness about, you know, the position that I was in, and that what I was doing wasn't working out for me, and I wasn't living a good life. And yet I felt as if the message that was being delivered by the fitness industry to the public was perpetuating this issue, to the point where people would ask me, like, how do I get lean? How do I get strong? And all that kind of stuff, looking at me and going, okay, you're lean, you're clearly like fit and healthy and everything like that. How do I do what you're doing? And I started to reach a point where I was like, well, wow, I don't feel like I can be totally transparent about what I'm doing, because the honest answer is I've had an eating disorder for a decade. Like, the honest answer when talking to people in the gym started to feel like, actually, this is not as cut and dry as people might think. So my experience of dealing with this kind of stuff in the fitness industry in the years when I started, I just took it for granted that that's what it was to be in, quote, good shape, that this is the, quote, lifestyle, that this is what being in shape looks like. It looks like making massive compromises on the food that you allow yourself all the time. It looks like having less fun than your friends. It looks like limiting your opportunities in terms of work and social stuff. It looks like living the gym guy life. And I just took it for granted as like, okay, that's just what it is. But as I got older, I was like, I don't like this. Like, that's not that. I'm not satisfied with this. This can't be the answer. And even less, I didn't agree with the fact that this was being pushed as this thing that should be put on a pedestal that people should work to achieve. I was like, actually, no, like this is not a life. Like, this is kind of awful. And I don't want to upset or offend anyone who chooses that lifestyle as the thing that they genuinely love. Because if you genuinely love that lifestyle, then all the power to you. Brilliant. But I'm talking about the people who live that lifestyle despite the fact that it isn't really what they want, because it's something that society puts on a pedestal. And I stopped being able to go along with that. I was like, no, this is not a narrative I want to push. I can't play my role in this anymore.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I really, it sounds like there was a real need for you to be in integrity to yourself, and you felt out of integrity to who you were. Right. And so, and I love what you shared there about it having to be in alignment for the individual, the way that they conduct themselves, that they're loving this. They're doing this because they love it, because they enjoy it, because they're at ease with themselves. They're not doing it to match themselves to an expectation of society.
Yes.
And so are you saying that for a time that you were trying to match yourself to an expectation of society?
Absolutely.
Or was there a genuine passion in it? Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Of course, there is a genuine passion. Like, I do enjoy what it is to be fit and healthy. I enjoy being able to move my body a certain way. I enjoy being physically fit. I enjoy being healthy. It's just taken a long time for me at this point to unpick the things that are truly me and that I actually enjoy doing and that I want to embody, versus the things that I was doing just because I thought that that's what society required of me, or that's what I thought I needed to be in order to be accepted and respected as a man.
Yeah, and I feel that's the case for so many young men. You know, I don't go to the gym anymore. Well, not for quite some time, but for a long time I was a gym goer throughout my 30s. And I would be in the gym and I would look at these young lads, 12, 13-year-old lads, very skinny and like just so, going for it, trying to lift too much weight and looking at themselves in the mirror. And I felt heartbroken that, when I was 12, 13, I was out on my push bike riding through the forests, like acting like a fool. And now this, I guess, with social media, right?
Mm.
And the way the world has changed, that the way you look is so focused on, that these young lads are just completely obsessed with trying to get muscles when they should be, I say they should be, but that's based on my judgment of, but being out in nature, enjoying the outside world.
Yeah. It really is heartbreaking to watch and to see, because I think I was on that cusp where I didn't have short form social media content when I was 13, 14, but I'd already bought into the fitness magazine kind of culture and everything. So that whole journey kind of railroaded my life around the age of 14, but I was an outlier in that particular era, like in the early 2000s.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now, with the prevalence of short form video content, it's becoming more and more normalized for young men, as young as 11, 12, 13, to be focused very heavily on looking muscular, looking like, doing that whole aesthetic physique thing. And honestly, for any lad like that age, I'd be like, dude, there is so much time later to lift weights and do that kind of stuff if you really enjoy it. Like, and if someone genuinely really enjoys lifting weights and training in that way, please do it. Yes, I'm not saying not do
Mm.
what you don't enjoy, but there is no reason to force yourself to do something that you really don't connect with. Like, there are so many different
Mm.
ways to move your body and everything like that. And like it, yeah. I just wish, like, one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't just enjoy my teenage years for what they were. That I spent those
Mm.
years desperately reaching for something that I thought I needed to be, and doing that like way too early, like feeling like there was this huge sense of urgency around it. And I
Mm.
guess, hindsight is always 2020, but yeah, to speak to what you said, does make me pretty sad to see like young lads in the gym just busting ass.
Yeah. Yeah. And, searching for their authenticity, going through that process of individuation, right? They're searching for their authenticity. They're searching to find who they are. And I guess it's normal to try things out, right? But what I kind of see for that lad who isn't doing what he loves to do is that he'll go down a certain path, find himself miserable because he's trying to hold himself to an ideal that isn't his own, and then potentially go down the path of addiction, right? Lose himself in addiction, whether that be alcohol, drugs, food, right? Food, which is, from my perspective, much more insidious. So we have to eat every day, right? We
Mm.
have to eat. It's like we don't have to drink a ton of booze and take a ton of drugs and have a ton of sex every day, but we have to eat.
Yeah.
So giving up drugs, alcohol is a much clearer and more obvious thing than giving up or regulating a food relationship, right? And so, love to hear your relationship with food was, and what the addiction was, what the process that you were going through whilst you were in the gym and you had that eating disorder.
I love the fact that you brought up the word addiction, because it's something that I've been wrestling with as far as terminology for a really long time. On one hand, the term food addiction speaks to a lot of people's experiences and seems to very accurately portray what's going on. On the other hand, there are a lot of really predatory, unhelpful people out there that are jumping on that term in order to paint unhelpful pictures of exactly how food is affecting us or how specific foods are affecting us. There's a lot of arguments about the mechanisms of what we could call food addiction and what that actually is. But
Mm-hmm.
the term food addiction itself speaks to the experience. And I'm still doing deep dives into the term food addiction and what that actually means. And the mechanisms behind it and what is a helpful message versus what might be unhelpful. But my experience with that was that I did feel at times, or, for a good 10, 15 years, I felt like I was powerless in the face of certain foods. I had experiences where I felt like I was being pulled down the street towards the 7-Eleven against my will. I had experiences where I would be almost crying with frustration while eating because I was making a choice that I knew that I was going to regret, but felt helpless surrounding that choice. And the really difficult thing here is that experience has so much crossover with what people might talk about in terms of the experience of something like alcohol addiction, for example, feeling powerless in the face of certain things. The really complicated part, like you said with food, is that where someone can give up alcohol, we can't give up food. And those foods that I used to feel powerless around, I can now have in moderation, completely peacefully, without a single issue because of the work that I've done. And this is the difference. But getting to the point where we can have those foods that we used to feel powerless around, and we can have them in moderation and have them peacefully. Getting to that point where you can have these foods that you used to feel powerless around and having them in moderation peacefully, that's a fucking journey. It's hard. A lot of dedication over a long time. And what most people find is that there are other, quote, solutions that recommend different approaches that might preach abstinence around certain foods. Like, if you can't, they work around this theory, or they work around the idea that if you can't control yourself around certain foods, it means that that food is the problem and you need to just practice abstinence from that food. And in terms of alcohol and other like drugs and everything, sure, yes, absolutely. It's much more nuanced with food, much more nuanced with food, and it feels simpler and often easier in the short term to just eliminate the foods that we struggle with. And for some people, I don't want to speak to everybody's experience because I'm not everybody. I'm myself. I know my experience, and I know the clients that I've worked with and what's worked for them. I work with the philosophy that moderation is mastery when it comes to food. Being able to get to the point where we can practice moderation peacefully, that is true mastery. And a lot of people don't like me for saying that because there is this strong message of abstinence around certain foods. But I just want to recognize that practicing abstinence will give you the kind of the impression that I've got this under control, but moderation is a much longer journey.
What I'm hearing you say is that moderation is the journey that's worked for you, and that, complete abstinence of certain foods. Fascinating. My mind's just kind of like coming into it. And so as you're talking, thinking about my relationship with different foods over the years and how, so let's just take pizza, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Pizza always used to be for me like a reward, like, oh, it's the end of the week, I deserve to have a pizza. But it wouldn't just be like a small pizza, it would be a huge pizza, right? And at the end of the pizza, I would be like, oh, and I'd feel kind of numbed out, really. I think I was coming to the end of a long working week. I was tired, I was exhausted, and if I had been able to get in touch with how I was really feeling, I probably felt quite down, quite sad, quite exhausted. But the pizza was like the reward for the end of the thing. But it brought a sense of heaviness and numb at the end of it. So it was. Yeah. Do you relate? You know what I'm talking about?
Carbohydrates like pizza are like those kind of doughy, kind of carbohydratey things, especially. They're not like a sedative in terms of like a pharmaceutical sedative, but they do have a kind of sedating effect on some of us. And that process of having a particular food as the reward for sacrificing, it speaks to the relationship with that particular food and the role that particular food was playing in your life at that time, and the space that food was occupying, what you were experiencing at that time of your life, that the cycle that you were in, what your expecting of yourself with work, maybe, you know, things like what, yeah, it speaks to what role was that pizza filling at that point in time for you, you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. What role was that pizza fulfilling for me at that time? And I suppose, you know, it's just not something that's really talked about amongst men. You know,
Yeah.
food is just seen as a, oh yeah, you know, and eating a lot isn't even, I don't see in circles, is seen as necessarily a question mark, or like, look how much that guy's eating. Like it's almost celebrated, like in a way, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, I only have my own experience and the clients that I've worked with, and I know that food can be a huge hindrance to productivity, right? If
Mm.
our relationship with food isn't right.
Absolutely. And this is where, like, I wouldn't want anyone listening to this to think that the emphasis for me is not on a healthy diet. Like, it's
Mm.
all these messages around unconditional permission surrounding food and everything like that. They very easily get misconstrued. You know, they're nuanced messages. They're very complex things that cannot be explained accurately in a fucking tweet or like this short form content. Like, I cannot
Yeah.
explain or coach someone through the practice of unconditional permission in like a 60-second Instagram reel. And it's very easy with this culture of short form content to take very black and white messages. But this concept of what role different foods are playing in our lives, how do you feel after eating certain foods?
Mm.
It's all so nuanced, and food can be like, our relationship with food can be destructive. Like, it can hold us back. Like, there is
Mm.
100% such a thing as foods that don't serve us. The caveat was that with that is, like, we have to acknowledge that all foods, if we live in the Western world anyway, are in our environment constantly. There is an abundance of heavily processed, you know, high fat, high sugar foods that are around us all the time. So it helps to be well practiced in being able to deal with those foods so that they don't cause a problem. But yeah, that's not saying that we can live on Doritos and be cool, you know?
No, you can certainly, you know, you can certainly get away with more your food wise when you're younger, right? As our bodies get older, I certainly for myself become much more attuned to what my body does like, what my body doesn't like. I think one of the things there for me is within a few minutes, 5-10 minutes of eating something, if I'm tuned into my stomach, I can know if my body is appreciating this or not, right? And so kind of bringing in that topic to get your thoughts on that, and also conscious eating, I guess, like having a relationship with the food that we're putting into our mouths.
Absolutely. Like, it's always good to be able to do exactly what you just said, to be able to tune into our physical experience around different food choices. And in a perfect world, we'd all be making food choices around, how does this make me feel? Is this choice serving me? Do I feel good after eating this? Do I enjoy the process of eating it? Is this food in line with my, you know, value system and what I want for myself? And do I feel good eating it? But the noise surrounding food, the shame, the guilt, the moral judgment, the complications that come from the relationship with food get in the way of us being truly in tune with that experience, and often get in the way of us being able to make choices that really serve us. So when, for example, people who know what they're talking about say things like unconditional permission, we're not talking about literally just going and eating any damn food at any time, regardless of the consequences. We're talking about the psychological mindset of unconditional permission. We're talking about removing guilt, removing shame, removing some of those heavy, knotted experiences around food, in order to be more in touch with exactly what you said, which is, how do I feel after eating this?
Yeah, yeah, no, I hear that. I hear that, and the shame, the guilt. These are things that maybe aren't in most people's conscious awareness, like because of our culture towards food. Would you say? Do you think that's the case?
Oh yeah. Yeah, like as a bit of an experiment, just listen to the way we talk about food. Oh, this is naughty of me, or oh, this is bad of me, or I'm going to give myself a treat, or all this language. Like it's right there in our language. But
Yes.
in order to cultivate the kind of dynamic with food that I feel like you're describing, that, is this what's really going to work for me? We need to cultivate this mindset of neutrality. And it's hard to do
Mm.
that with this language around food that's kind of baked into our society, and the implication being moral judgment of different food choices.
Yes. Yes. So great what you're sharing is my mind is traveling to, like, as a child sitting at the table is, if you eat all your dinner, then, and you're a good boy, then you,
Yes,
then you can have some ice cream, right?
that's
So
it.
it's like, yeah. And like, looking at it now is like, what you just said a moment ago about, oh, this is a bit naughty, isn't it? Like having an ice cream. It's like, well, why is it naughty? Like I'm almost programming this food into my system in a negative way. Like I'm telling this food, like, you're naughty, but you're going to go inside me, and now I don't feel great because I'm unconsciously shaming myself, right?
Yeah. And what the example that you just gave was amazing, because saying like, eat all your dinner so that you can be a good boy, and then if you're a good boy, you get the ice cream. That completely removes the agency from the child to decide whether or not they even want ice cream. It's like the implication is it becomes all about approval and being a quote good boy, and approval in the eyes
Mm.
of parents, approval in the eyes of our peers. Like it it leaves no space for any kind of individual to go, do I even feel like an ice cream? Like
Yeah.
it all the moral judgment, it's messed up.
What's coming up for me there is different types of eating disorders, right? Overeating, binge eating, which seems what is one of your specialities, right? Starving yourself. I forgot that all the terms have gone out of my mind. So there is anorexia, of course, which is to starve yourself of food, right? Bulimia, which is to binge eat and then to regurgitate the food.
To purge in
Um,
some way, yeah.
to purge in some way. Yeah, I mean, you're the specialist. There are other forms of eating and
Yeah, these are
disorder.
you nailed it with like the broad terms. Like there's the anorexia, which is the straight up calorie restriction. It's the restriction of food with no purging involved. There's bulimia, which involves like the binge and purge cycle. And the thing that most people misunderstand about bulimia, because of the way Hollywood kind of portrays bulimia, is that the purge doesn't need to necessarily be vomiting, or purging through induced vomiting. It's the like bulimia, what bulimia is really, it's the binge followed by compensatory measures. That compensation could come in the form of fasting the following day, or putting yourself through 4 hours on the treadmill or whatever the next day to make up for what happened the night before. And this is a really
Okay.
tough one, to talk about sometimes, because a lot of socially acceptable diets, I guess you'd call them, or philosophies around food, are essentially bulimia. It's a really uncomfortable thing to say, and it's a really uncomfortable thing to put out there, because some people will fight that tooth and nail and be like, absolutely not. That's bullshit. This is just, I'm just fasting. It's a healthy thing.
Mm,
I'm whatever. And
mm,
I would say that the action itself is less important than the intention, right? Like this is
mm.
something that's so important that we need to really understand, to avoid a lot of really pointless and useless arguments surrounding these things. If the intention of a particular action is about guilt, shame, compensation, all that kind of stuff, then yeah, that's leaning more in the disordered eating kind of spectrum. That's more, potentially bulimia. Like I don't fast myself because of my experiences with food. It's not helpful for me. I don't
Hmm.
recommend fasting for the people that I work with, because it's contraindicated for people who have struggled with the binge and restrict cycle. But I'm not going to say that there aren't some people out there that find something like fasting to be helpful for them in some way that makes sense with their life experience. And that's the nuance of the conversation. So bulimia is that binge and compensate. Binge eating disorder is binging without the compensation. And then there are all kinds of gray areas that exist in between these three experiences.
Yeah, and I was just, as you were sharing, I was thinking how many individuals are there out there who are suffering with these things under the surface, but are maybe justifying it to themselves. And the question of control, and also what was coming up for me was the curiosity around exercising a lot and restricting, and then eating a lot and then restricting, and this. And I know for men as well, with a lot of body images like leaning down, they bulk up, right? Bulking up, and then leaning down. So they're going through these stages of eating all this food and then eating nothing. What's your take on that? And I get it from a perspective, of course, of like from a bodybuilding perspective. But do you think that's a dangerous practice to engage in the sense of it could become an addiction? It could become destructive for the individual?
For some people, it becomes exceptionally destructive. But the more important question to ask is, what's your intention? Like, are you, say, let's talk bodybuilding, for example. Have you dedicated your life to bodybuilding because in the deepest part of yourself, you just fucking love it? Like, do you genuinely love it? Really? And if you,
we're coming back to where we started, aren't we?
Yeah.
Which is like, the most, like you say, it's the most fundamental question. Do you love it?
That's it. And because like the example that I like to use sometimes is like, I'm a guitar player and singer. Like I really love music. I'm deeply invested in the craft of music. I was lucky enough to tour full time with rock bands on and off, like as a job in my 20s and everything, and play some really big shows. I had some really fortunate and very cool opportunities with that. And my investment in music now these days is about the craft, is about becoming as good as possible just because I love it. How ridiculous would it be if I used someone else's prowess in terms of music as a measuring stick of whether or not I approved of them as a person? Like, but society puts certain body types on a pedestal because it's what we like. Or because, no, that's not wrong. It's not really what we like. It's just because what society puts on a pedestal at this point in time. So there are a whole lot of people investing in modifying their body size and shape, not because they love the craft, but because they feel the social pressure to do so. That is, I feel, a more important question for me to ask people, or a more important place for our mind to go than, is what they're doing objectively bad or good? Because that can open a whole lot of rabbit holes and cause a whole lot of arguments. Because you'll get these people that are like, wait, like you're shitting on the thing that is actually my life's work and I love this. And you're telling me that it's morally wrong? Like, no, that's not what we're saying at all. It's like, are you doing it because you love it? Or are you doing it because you feel social pressure to do so?
Beautiful. Are you doing it because you love it, or are you doing it because you feel social pressure to do so?
Yeah.
So asking yourself that simple question and then being really honest with yourself about that, maybe a very difficult honesty to have, right? Especially if you're in the loop of a binge of an eating disorder.
Yeah, it is really hard, and I want to recognize anyone who's in that space and asking those questions. Like, I'm still asking myself that question as a practice. Whenever I write a training program for myself, whenever I, primarily whenever I step into a gym anymore, whenever I make food choices, but mostly these days, my dynamic with food is pretty good. It's about my choices regarding training. Like, am I doing this training program because I'm invested in being able to move my body in this way and really enjoying this? Or am I, programming stuff for myself that I don't necessarily enjoy all that much, but I'm doing it because I'm still hearing those echoes of needing to look a very particular way. Like, it's an ongoing journey to just stay aware of this stuff and unpick it. And Yeah.
Yeah, no, I really hear that. It's an ongoing journey, and it really requires that mental fortitude to look within oneself without judgment or shame, right? And to be able to answer honestly to that. In your own journey in becoming more self-led in that regard, have you had a lot of support yourself in becoming that man?
I had to find the way a lot myself just because conversations around this topic with men were not happening when I was struggling. This is one of the reasons I've dedicated myself so much to being a man in this space because I'm trying to create the resource that I needed.
Okay.
There were a couple of people along the way that helped with particular pieces of the puzzle, like a psychologist who I saw in my 20s. I went to see him to help with anxiety and OCD. He was very helpful in the sense of some of the things that he taught me became then useful with navigating the process of overcoming an eating disorder. And then there was one other mentor that I had at one point who was part of the Australian Olympic team. I resonated with working with him because he understood what it was like to be invested in training and to some degree physical appearance and everything like that. He was invested in gym culture and being that guy, and I felt that I could listen to him because he understood where I was coming from rather than just sitting across the room from me telling me what I should believe or what I shouldn't believe. He was there with me going, okay, I see that this is important to you. It's important to me too. Let's talk about how you might be able to do this in a way that doesn't ruin your life. So those two people, yeah, Colin and Wade, they helped a lot.
Colin, Colin and Wade.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that bringing their energies here, and yeah, I really feel it, hearing your gratitude for those conversations, for that guidance. But what I really heard you share is that, you had to be the torchbearer in this. In many ways, you're a pioneer in as a man, and I really do see that because I'm connected to a few women who are therapists that specialize in this work, in the work that you do, and I see a lot of women. Having worked in the Priory in the past myself and seen most of like the figure I said earlier, 25% being men. And it does seem like it's something that is suffered with more so by women. So yeah, just honoring you in the fact that you're carrying that torch for men by turning the volume up on like normalizing it in a way, right?
Oh, dude, that's very, very kind of you to say. I don't, I don't really consider myself a pioneer. It's, I'll take it. Thank you. It's,
Take it.
it's, it's not really how I think about myself. I just know that a lot could have been different for me. I missed a lot of opportunities. I missed a lot of experiences that I'll never get back because I was so
Mm,
wrapped up in an eating disorder, essentially, that I wasn't able to be present in my life in the way that I wished I could be. And
mm,
like I mentioned with music, I had some amazing opportunities and some really cool things going on that I was only ever able to be semi present because part of me was always thinking, will I be able to squeeze in a workout at this hotel? Will I be able to get the food that I need to eat in order to stay healthy on this particular tour? Do they have, like, where can I find a serving of lean protein in Osaka? Like all of these kind of
mm,
questions that were just occupying so much of my mental bandwidth that really should have been spent on going, look, this is a once in a lifetime thing. This is an era in your life that is very special. You're not going to get it again. Fucking enjoy it while it's here. And
mm, mm.
I wish I'd had help early enough to allow me to be more present with those things. But I think when it comes to pioneers, Harrison Pope, I think that's his name, wrote an incredible book called The Adonis Complex about the recognition and diagnosis of male eating disorders. That book came out 20, 30 years ago now. It's not very well known. There was I heard about that book through a film that came out, again, I think in the early 2000s, called Bigger, Stronger, Faster. Now, it's an incredible film that has this small cult following about the use of performance enhancing drugs. So this film, Bigger, Stronger, Faster, was an incredible thing for me to watch at some point. And through that, I found The Adonis Complex, which is a book by Harrison Pope. So yeah, those are two pieces that were from kind of pioneers, the first people I know of that were really talking about this as men.
Awesome. Thanks for the book recommendation. Yeah, that sounds like a powerful read. And the thing that's been constant for our conversation is exercise and food. That there is a link. Do you think that, speaking just to men, and yourself as a man, that those two things are generically linked? The body image, the binge eating, the kind of like OCD that you're talking about, isn't it? It's the going on under the surface. There was never a moment of peace for you, because under the surface you're always thinking about, where will I get that food? Looking at that, the link between exercise, food, and the psychology underneath, is it all going on together? Can you have the binge eating without the exercise issue?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It's not like a lot of people who struggle with binge eating in particular don't necessarily have an obsessive or compulsive relationship with exercise. With bulimia, in my experience anyway, like I need to find some research on this, but yeah, it's possible to separate. It's possible to have an eating disorder without exercise being a component. That is an experience that some people do have for sure.
Okay. Good. That's good to hear. I really want to normalize it for our listeners. If there's anyone out there who is listening and is thinking, I'm really resonating with what Marcus is sharing, but I'm not sure if I've got a problem or anything. I just like to have a lot of food on a Saturday or a Sunday. Or what would you say are maybe the telltale signs or questions that individual might be able to ask themselves to develop a greater understanding as to if it is really a problem? I mean, my kind of take before you answer that is like, if you're asking yourself the question, then there's likely some element of problem there, right? But yeah, what's your take on that?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because there is a difference between overeating and binge eating. And, garden variety overeating looks very different to the kind of experience that is binge eating. Now, this isn't to say that very consistent overeating isn't sometimes not the greatest for our health. And, we can still do stuff about that. But binge eating is defined by usually eating quite a large volume of food, large quantity of food in a defined period of time, often eating quite fast and having this sense of loss of control, not being able to stop. Those are the hallmarks of binge eating a large quantity of food in a defined period of time, sometimes eating quite fast, not being able to stop, not feeling in control. Often eating well past the point of physical fullness to the point where you feel discomfort. Now, there are variations in that experience. For some people, binge eating can be very ritualistic, happening almost on a schedule, specific days, specific times, specific foods. For other people, it can be very triggerable and impulsive, almost like they kind of hold it in, and then break, and then a binge will be triggered and they'll go for it. For other people, it's more planned. Some people, for the people that plan, it can be, like I said, ritualistic. Certain foods, sometimes eating very mindfully, like not necessarily eating super fast, but just eating very mindful, like being with the food, having this whole thing around it. But it's helpful to connect with the idea that sense of loss of control is something that's like, I couldn't stop even if I wanted to. That can be a common ground. And also there are other versions of binge eating where maybe less volume of food is eaten, but a smaller volume of food might be eaten very quickly, feeling very out of control. And then it's like, I'm going to quickly put the lid on that and put it aside and pretend it didn't happen. But it's like, I've just gotten home, hoovered a bunch of food really, really quickly, felt really out of control, but then managed to stop. So there is variation for different experiences. But yeah, typically it's that eating a large volume of food in a defined period of time while feeling out of control.
Okay, thanks for that. And so, yeah, with that's powerful. With that in mind, what if someone is in that space? What are they seeking? What is going on under the surface? Like, what is going on psychologically for them?
That's a
What are they trying to do?
Yeah, that's another really good question, and it varies from individual to individual, but there is common links. Broadly, some people where dietary restriction plays a very big part in what's causing the binge eating. It can be a relief from the dietary restriction, just letting go of the need to white knuckle through just trying to stick to a particular diet, trying to restrict calories, trying to avoid certain foods all the time. It can be this defined window of time where we just let go, and we don't have to use the willpower, don't have to, like, just, it's a letting go, just like, fuck it, I'm going for it. And then often there's the fuck it mentality. There's like, well, I've started now, I may as well keep going because I've ruined today, and I'm going to get back on this tomorrow, and this is the last time this is ever going to happen, and from tomorrow I'm going to be perfect. So I'm just going to make the most of it today, because tomorrow I'm never going to eat these foods ever again. So with the dietary restriction, it can be almost like the breaking point of our willpower, the breaking point of the energy investment in maintaining this rigid diet. With emotional dysregulation, people often describe these episodes to me as the only time where they ever get any real sense of peace. It's like the only time I ever get to fully relax and properly switch off is when I'm eating, and sometimes eating specific foods. So in the sense of emotional dysregulation and food playing a part in the emotional experience, food providing this window of relief that we don't feel like we can get from anything else in our life. And then with body image, sometimes that brings the elements of shame and guilt into the experience, where, again, broadly, someone might start eating and hate themselves for it, and then comfort themselves in the face of those feelings with more food. That's another perspective on the experience. So what's going on for someone in these moments has a few different facets.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're just describing a loop, like a shame loop. And I guess that's what any form of addiction is, really, isn't it? Like you were talking about, what you're just talking about there. I was thinking about, how someone with an alcohol problem may come to a Friday night and think, oh, finally I can relax. I can, not even necessarily if they have a problem. It just might be the attachment to, I have a drink of alcohol and I can finally relax. And that being no different with food, is like you just shared, that being the only thing that switches things off. And so using food to regulate, and I guess like what came up for me there immediately is like, when we're born, what is the first thing that we do to regulate? We go to mum and we receive the milk of the mother from the teat, and that regulates us, right? So it's hardwired into us, food to regulate.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. Food is associated for most people, or a lot of people at least, with comfort, with soothing. You're absolutely right. And then that experience, you gave a really good example before of, like, you get the ice cream if you're a good boy. It's reinforced through childhood and all these kind of things. So yeah, it definitely can. Food plays a significant role in that.
Yeah, amazing. Such a deep and profound topic, and I'm sure we could go on for hours. Gonna call it a day there, Marcus. But thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge and experience, personal experience, and everything with us. Before we close, if there's anyone out there listening who thinks, do you know what, I think I've got a problem with food. I'm really resonating with what you and Marcus have been talking about today. What words of comfort, words of advice, questions that they might be able to ask themselves would you give?
Firstly, I'd say that you're not alone. You are not alone. So many people struggle with this. And the cruel nature of it is that when people struggle, they struggle in private. They struggle silently, and they don't talk about it, which gives a lot of us the impression that If we are struggling with it, then, oh my God, this isn't happening to anyone else. Like, why am I doing this? This isn't happening to any of my friends. Why am I struggling with this? You are 100% not alone. There are solutions available. You don't need to struggle with it alone. And I'd say, just as a piece of advice, be really aware of garden variety health and fitness advice that is accepted by the wider community that might not be serving you as an individual given your experience with food.
Yeah, that's powerful. So to trust your own self, to come to a place of trusting your own knowing of what's going on, right? Not falling into common threads of judgment, right? Which is something that you touched on quite a lot throughout our chat.
Yeah. To ask ourselves that question, is this working out for me? And not just, is this working out for me right now, but is this working out for me as a long-term thing? There are some avenues that can briefly give us windows of relief while exacerbating the larger problem. So that is a trap to look out for. Just because something, quote, works for a few weeks or a couple of months doesn't mean it's the long-term solution, and it might be exacerbating the larger problem. That's a really difficult thing to connect with. It takes a lot of courage to connect with that. And if you find yourself going, I was able to be okay while I was doing X, Y, Z, I just don't have the willpower. Like, I just need to get the willpower and the discipline to keep doing that. I just need to go back to what was working while it was working. That's a sign that maybe that wasn't something that is a long-term solution.
Yeah. And what was just coming up for me there was how, as you were just describing that, is how that likely at core of people struggling with these issues, their inner child that is really in turmoil, right? And that this is about, like any form of healing and coming into wholeness, is about learning to love those parts of oneself that are sabotaging things. And yeah, I think we'll have to come on again to focus in on some of, I'm going to watch it back and pull out some of those gold quotes that you dropped in there that are so important. One of them being, ask yourself what your intention is first. What is your intention out of this exercise? What is your intention of it? Is it because you love it, or is it because you're trying to fit yourself to some kind of ideal? I love that. Absolutely love that. Thank you so much, Marcus.
It's a pleasure.
It's been great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me, mate.
And you're welcome. Yeah, I'll definitely another time again for sure. We can continue to dive. And again, honoring you in the work you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep sharing and serving, brother. Thank you so much.
Thank you, brother.